Let me take a moment to share with you a little bit about the presentation today. The Sagadahock Real Estate Association was founded in 1887, according to the Maine Preservation Award they got in 2018. They've played an incredible role in the development of downtown Bath, both in our economic vitality and in our community vitality. What they got the award for in 2018 was for the Morse family's steadfast belief in historic preservation. They took great care to keep their 15 buildings, including whole blocks of Bath's downtown, in excellent condition. They kept rent rates affordable for their tenants, and they went out of their way to understand and work on building a retail mix, moving simply beyond filling empty spaces and into seeking new businesses, the success of Bath's downtown. I particularly remember Jane's efforts for many years to fulfill the dream of a downtown hotel, and that is here now. John's and Jane's and Francis's father, John G. Morse, who began the Morse family's involvement with Sagadahock Real Estate Association. The Morse family has been central to Sagadahock Real Estate Association. Sagadahock Real Estate Association has been central to the City of Ships. I want to tell you that this award and a bunch of other material from the files of both the library and Bath Historical Society are in the history rooms, the boardroom essentially that's attached to the history room. So after this presentation, you can walk through that and see a variety of the materials that we have on the history. And there's some really neat stuff there. After Jane's passing in 2016, John has taken over the day-to-day management of the downtown businesses and has taken charge of the disposition of Sagadahock Real Estate Association's assets. They sold their last building in 2021. It was a big change in the story of Bath. And what your family's done for us has been pretty amazing.
I would say at the beginning that sometimes I've been known to be a little bit mouthy, so if you get tired of listening to this and you need to go home and go do something else, it won't bother me. I don't get worried about that stuff anymore. So I was told that I had to have a title for this, and I came up with the Community Pride and Partnership for over 100 years, Sagadahock Real Estate Association. And this goes back to when the Moses started the association and the business and so forth. But when I say partnership, this organization would never have existed if it wasn't for those entrepreneurs who were filling the office spaces and the storefronts and stuff like that. They do the nitty-gritty grunt work, and don't let anybody tell you different. I mean, if you're a small business and you're the owner and maybe you have 1 or 2 helpers and you work 6 days a week, you earn it. And our policy was always to help them out, not charge too much, and we didn't want to drive them out of town. So, all right, so first of all, I want you to know this isn't a thesis paper. This is, these are some reflections about SREA and its properties over the years, and they're in no specific order, and they're presented for your enjoyment. And I'd also like to thank my wife Betsy for doing all of the technical stuff, the pictures and stuff like that. If she wasn't there, we wouldn't have the slideshow. So also to Robin Haynes for doing a lot of research for me, answering my questions about names, dates, and other historical events. I mean, I even asked her this morning when she arrived, I had a question for her. So, and there are others out there that have provided questions and information and whatever. So thank you all for helping me to do this. This is my favorite picture of Bath. And I want to say that people think that Bath is always the same. We've remained the same. We're old-fashioned. We got the old stores and stuff like that. If you look at this picture, there is one building that is still here today. This is pre-1960, but this is the Union Block right here. The difference between the Granite Block and the Union Block. And the Union Block is the only one that's still standing today. This is the granite block. It got burned in the big fire. This is the Sagadahock house that burned in the big fire of 1894. This is the Bath Bank that was Governor King, General King, William King. And this is the Universalist Church here. And these are the buildings that were on the other side of the street that have been torn down to make the First National Bank of Portland back in the early 60s. So everything here has changed except this one building. So don't ever let anybody tell you that Bath hasn't changed. So it has. So the Universalist Church was built in 1839 and 1840 by Anthony Coombs Raymond. If you look at the steeple is almost identical to that of Winter Street Church. And in 1846, Anthony Coombs Raymond built the Winter Street Church. So it's very interesting. The Bath Bank was built by Governor King. That's the little building with the columns at the head of the street there. That was built in 1810. And the Sagadahock House was built in 1849. One of the things about the Sagadahock House is that you notice that over the door entrance there are columns in the building, in the doorway there. And if you look at this picture, which is a reverse looking the other direction on Front Street, this picture in the 22 Historical Society calendar, there are no columns on the front porch there. And this picture was 1870. So, and it shows this shows that the bank was still there, but the church was gone and the church block had been built. So for some reason, they took those columns out. So this is Oliver Moses. He was he and his brother William came to Bath in 1826 as tinsmiths, and then they got into the shipbuilding business in 1844. He was also the first president and a founding member of the First National Bank of Bath, and he died in 1882, which before Sagadahock Real Estate Association was formed. So this is his son, Galen Clapp Moses, and he was the son of Oliver, and he and his brother Frank and a fellow named Mr. Harris were charged with settling Oliver's estate, and in doing so, they formed Sagadahock Real Estate on March 10th, 1887. And the first building that they bought in June 12th, which was in 1889, was the Sagadahock House, the center of the downtown. Okay, this is the bank block. This is one of the oldest buildings in the Sagadahock bunch of buildings that they own. It was built in 1858. I guess the reason it was called the bank block because there was a bank on the second floor, and in fact where the Sagadahock office was in the second floor, there's a great big vault that you can walk into. And I always thought that it was the Sagadahock Bank. But after Robin did some research and figured out all the history of the Sagadahock Bank and it being in the bank building that William King built, I decided that was not the Sagadahock Bank. So I don't know what bank was in the bank block. So there's plenty of research out there. If anybody really wants to hunt and do some research, there's plenty to be done. This is the church block. And Oliver Moses bought the church, the Universalist Church, in 1860, and then he tore it down and he built this block in 1863. The Universalist Church, I think its next place that it was up on Washington Street across from the end of Linden Street. It's no longer there, It's the Mini Brown Center is where the Universalist Church used to be, but that's where they moved. There was some thought that maybe they didn't like the heat down here, or maybe they liked what kind of money Oliver was going to give them, and that was why they decided to move on. So this is a part of the front of the church block. And the interesting part about this is that the front of this building, the trim on the front of this building, is all metal. And it was built by the Bath Iron Foundry, which existed down behind the alleyway in the public parking lot, what is now the public parking lot. And this was the predecessor of the Bath Iron Works. But there is, you see on the top of the post, there's a face up there. And there were, I believe, of all of these columns that were on the front of the building, there was a face, but this is the last one that is left. Somebody asked me, who is that face? Who is that face? So there's another research project right there to see who it was that Oliver really thought was that important that should be on the front of his building. This is in front of the church block too, and this must be an early late 1800s picture, and this is how they did snow removal in the old days. And it's interesting, there are three businesses. First one to the left is New England Telephone and Telegraph, and then the one in the middle, you can see the brothers. That was Marx and Brothers, which was evidently on the second floor, and to the right was E.S. Crosby. And you can also see the Bath National Bank had been built at that time, and you can see that way down on the far left. So I think I've got another snow picture that corresponds with this same time frame, and that will be later on. This is what was called the Bath Bank, built by Governor General William King in 1810, and presumably there were 4 banks in this building. This is a post-1863 picture, because you can see that the church block has been built behind it, and the church building is no longer there. The Sagadahock Bank was chartered in 1836, and they bought this building from William King in 1859, and then they became a national bank in 1865. And if you read between the columns on the far right there, I think that it says Sagadahock National Bank there on the front of the building. Okay, this picture is to show this eagle that's up in the top of in front of the bank there. That's a wooden hand-carved eagle. And if you in several more pictures here, you're going to see it as we go along. And my father had it taken off of the Lincoln Block building at some point in time, and it was given to the Marine Museum. It was on display in the hall as you go in to straight towards the back of the building when you go in, on the right-hand side up on the wall. But I think they've taken it down and put another display. It's been moved out and a different display has been put there. But anyways, that's where it went. So it still exists today. So how old that was, I don't know. But it was a wooden eagle, and it was still in very nice condition. On here, you can see the eagle is there on this building. Okay, now I think these pictures are out of sequence, but you can sort of look at the cars down here and decide what year that is. And we have the clock here is on the corner of this building, and we have an entranceway here on this building. At this point in time, this was the First National Bank of Bath. and you can see the sign on the thing, so. All right, here we are. This is out of sequence, but this is what it looks like today. And there's no eagle, there's no clock, and we have two entrances into the building, one into the barber shop and one into Cafe Creme. But here, you go back, and this is probably in the 1940s. And interestingly enough, the clock and the eagle are still there, but we have a side entrance down here to go into the bank. So at some point, the side entrance was taken away and they put in the entrance on the corner here. Now, we know where the clock is. The clock belongs to the Crookers, and it's somewhere in their domain. And there are a few people that would like to have the clock come back and be reinstalled on that building with the permission of the owner, of course. But evidently there hasn't been any progress made in trying to acquire the clock. But it would be a wonderful thing to put on display there, and it'd be an addition to the downtown. This is an older version, but this is the Sagadahock block, which replaced the Sagadahock house when it burned in 1894, and because of the big fire. And this Thompson's Brothers was one of the first, I think it was one of the first stores that was in the building after it was rebuilt. And you may or may not know that the corner of Front and Center Street is called Thompson's Corner. And this is why, because of the Thompson Brothers store here. And also you can see the Hallett's drugstore is here, and that was a long time tenant in that position. This is I think in the late 40s, early 50s, but Thompson's Brothers are no longer there, and it's J.J. Newberry's there. Hallett's is still there. Endicott Johnson is still there. And I believe the also in there was what we used to call the Green Front. Who's laughing? Because that was the state liquor store, but that was the term that everybody used was, I'm going up to the Green Front. And whatever.
That 84 Front Street.
Yeah, right next to Rennie's. So this is the Sagadahock block today, and you can see that right here, in the sidewalk, you look, and there are brass letters there that says Thompson's Corner on it, and that was for the Thompson's Brothers store that was in the front here before Newberry's and whatever. So you can see Newberry's and the Hallett's clock here, and I believe that there was the big snow in 1952, and I'm guessing that this is the 1952 picture. Probably it was taken by Herbie Douglas. Herbie had a photo shop down on the back end of Bass Savings, and that's where everybody went and got their photographs developed and whatever. But he also took a lot of pictures, and this was probably one of his. So this, I think, corresponds with the picture that we saw down in front of the church block. But the interesting thing about this is that you look up and you see the trolley wires in the street. The other thing that you see here that was done away with later is that you actually have the power and telephone poles going down Front Street. There are none of those now. We just have the small light poles and stuff like that. Here again, these are pictures of the buildings on the right that will be, you'll see later, that will be removed to be, so that the First National Bank of Portland could be built there. That was in the early 60s. But I think that these buildings, not the savings bank, but the other buildings on the right belong to, at the time, before they were removed, belonged to the Sagadahock Real Estate Association. Okay, now we're switching down to the other end of town. And this shows the Medanic block and a little building between that, and then the Grassy block, and then the Columbia block. And there are a couple of things that we want to look at in this picture. In the Medanic block, you look and you notice that there are, looks like 5 windows on the second floor and then 2 additional windows. And also down on the street level, you have a side door on Elm Street, as well as doors that enter in off of Front Street. And the Medanic block was actually 3 buildings built together. So when the 2 windows on the far right were, that building, that part of the building was removed, what we have today is a building, and the brick wall on that side is only 1 brick thick, because they built these buildings right together, and they had a so-called common wall. And so that had to be dealt with when some of the other stuff was done. Notice how tall the Columbia block is. And there was another big fire shortly after the 1894 fire that burned the Sagadahock house, that burned down here. And here again, I've got the stupid pictures out of sequence. So we'll see what we come up with here. This is another thing, and somebody has marked the picture with an arrow up at the top to point that the roof on the Columbia block is different than it was in another picture. But you can see by the horse and buggy how old this was. And this is before Sean Island, who bought this, has renovated it, but this shows there were two stores. The lunch store was in the light blue thing, and then on the corner was the camera store that young Bill King had at the time. And then there was you can see the Harbor Lights is in the shorter building there. So in 1891, all of our boys and the other members of Sagadahock Real Estate Association, they made a big purchase on February 22nd, 1891, and there were seven different buildings that were purchased at the time, and these 2 existing ones here on Elm Street were some of those, and there were some other smaller buildings that were on Elm Street that they acquired at the same time. When I got to selling these buildings, the lawyers went up to the courthouse and looked through the registry of deeds and said, well, there's nothing in there. There's nothing in there. We can't find anything in there. And they didn't realize that they had to go way back to 1891 to find the original deeds, and that's how long we had owned it. So they were rather surprised when they had to do that. This building in the middle, which we called it, was the Max Coots building, and Max had a clothing and shoe business there when I was a teenager. That's one of the last wooden buildings there is in the downtown section. I think there's one over by Matero's beside Matero's or something, there's a house there that's a wooden framed house, but I think that this one is the other last wooden frame building. And this is the building Lisa, who runs the hair salon there, has, since she bought it, she has renovated it, and this is what it looks like today. And this is what we call the Farnham building, because it used to be, it was evidently rented to Farnham Lumber. I don't know whether they had their office or their hardware or whatever in there, but the lumber company was in the existing parking lot on Water Street, across the street from the old Bath Fire Station, if those of us who are old enough to remember that. So I sold this to Job, and he owns this Best Thai too, and he owns a couple other Thai restaurants around the state of Maine. So one of the things I'd like to say about when I was selling the buildings to people is that I tried to sell buildings to people who already were renting them from us and were interested in owning, but I also sold to people who wanted to make sure that they were going to stay in Bath, and they understood what Bath was all about. I had a few people come to me from out of state who they wanted to own, they were going to be absentee landlords, and well, I'm up here in the summertime so I can take care of it. And what are you going to do in the wintertime when you're not here? Who's going to run this thing? We're not going to do that kind of thing. We want people who are more interested in being here. Okay, so this is the out of sequence picture, but this is the Medanic block before the big fire that was down there after 1895 or something like that. You can see the difference in the roof line on the grassy block. You can see the difference in the roof line on the Columbia block, and this wooden building where the Medanic block is today must have been completely burned down. So here again, no changes in Bath except here. Okay, so this is the grassy block today. And this is the Columbia block today, significantly lower and with a different roof. This was the home of the rec center when I was a kid, and everybody went down there after school. And I believe that before that, during World War II, it was the home of the USO, unless I'm wrong about that. I don't know the date of construction for this building, but SREA bought it on the big deed in 1891. And here again, this is very interesting because the access to the second floor is this doorway right here, which is actually, you can see the line between the Moses building and the Columbia building, and the stairway is actually in the Moses building, but that's how you get to the Columbia building. And I will show you this is a picture of the Moses building, but here is the doorway, which is in the Moses building, but it says Columbia block over the doorway. So it's quite interesting. Above this is this ornamental panel on the front there that says YMCA, and it's quite interesting. There were some people when the new YMCA was built suggested that maybe this or the one that's over the front door of the Moses building might be moved out to be added to the new building on the YMCA, but that I think that budgetary needs killed that before it happened, and probably the people downtown wouldn't have wanted to take this historic thing off of this building in the historic district. And there is the one on the front door on the Summer Street side of the front door. So I'm going to go back a couple of slides here. One of the interesting things about the Moses and Columbia building, and I don't know which part of it was, but you see here on the right is what was the new A&P building was built here. But it used to be that the A&P was over, I think, probably on the first floor in the Columbia building there for a long time. And then after it moved across the street to the new store, I think that the Bath Unemployment Office was over there in that space. This is another shot of the Moses building, and it's kind of interesting that it has a round corner on the building. And this building, I believe, was donated by Galen, he had it built for the YMCA. And he also had this patent-free library building. He paid for that. So he was the real philanthropic person from the Moses family that really did things for Bath, and he was thinking of the community, like the title of this talk. But interestingly enough, Sagadahock never owned this building until 1981, and that was after the YMCA had built their new building up the hill. They were still renting a piece of this building, but they were mostly using their new building. This is the back of the this is the Moses building here, and these windows up here, I believe, are the back end of the gymnasium in the Moses building. And then this is the Columbia block here, and down here was where the Y pool was in the new Y, and the Y pool was built in the same place that the Uptown Theater was. You came in through one of the entrances on the front. I think it may be the last one of Lisa Marie's sections of her store. That was the entrance where you came into the Uptown, but the theater was here, and it ran lengthways like this behind the building. And then this is the grassy block here. But this is after the new YMCA was torn down, and we had to paint and repair the backside of the building after the city tore down the building. But this is the new A&P building that was built to replace the one, and it now has brackets store in here, and this was the first building that we sold. Interestingly enough, do any of you remember there were two streets that were eliminated to build this, and one street is right here, which is the property line between the Brackett's lot and what was the Sampson's, I call the Sampson's building to the right. And then there was another street right here that went through to Commercial Street. Does anybody remember what those names were?
Commerce and Ferry.
Right. Commerce was this one, and this was Ferry Street here. When I sold this building, we had to go to the city and get the street had been discontinued, but it hadn't been dispersed to anybody. We had to get deeds that gave one side of it to the Brackets and one side to this side here when we sold that. And now we're back up to the other end of town. This is an old picture of Center Street, the north side of Center Street, and This is before the fire, so this building right here is the Sagadahock House. And then this building down here is the old City Hall, which is setting on the lot where the Grant Building is today. But all of these buildings burned in the fire, except for City Hall did not burn in the big fire in 1894. So this is what Center Street looks like today. You can see the Grant Building, the Markson Building, the Gill Strip Building, the Trust Company Building, and then Sagadahock Block at the top of the hill. This is the Grant Building, which was after City Hall was torn down and it had been replaced by the Davenport City Hall. This building was built in 1937. Actually, it was built in two pieces, the front piece, and then later on they built the back piece. But it's the signage at the top here saying that it's the Grant Building is quite strange, but it's a little different. Maybe in 1937 that was the modern thing to do. I don't know.
Very much so.
Sagadahock didn't buy the Grant Building until 1971 was when they acquired the Grant Building, and it was it got rented to the ironworks and to actually the Coast Guard had some offices in there when they were rehabbing some of their vessels at the ironworks and whatever. So there was probably more technology in the internet lines and whatever connections in this building than there was anywhere else in downtown Bath. So this is a close-up picture of the City Hall, and it was constructed as a townhouse in 1837, and then in 1928, when the Davenport Memorial Building was built, it replaced this, and then this was torn down to make way for the Grant Building. This is a today picture of the Markson, what we call the Markson block. The Marksons had their store in there. I don't know when we acquired this, but one of the important things about this was that they had a tremendous piece of the parking lot out back that was probably bigger than their building, but it was a big thing for Sagadahock to acquire that, because that allowed us to have parking spaces for our tenants that were up on Front Street that didn't have any parking space that goes with them. My understanding is that the bakery, that somebody is coming back, and the bakery is going to open. I don't know when, but it's supposed to reopen sometime. Today is the reopening of the bakery? Okay, good. So this is the Gill Strip Building, and this is where, when they had to tear the buildings down on Front Street to build the bank, this is where the Bath Smoke Shop went, and then it was later Ernie Back's, and it's now been the candy store for a while. This also is the scene of an incident where my father learned the hard way about renting residential units on the second floor of the building. So this was the building that they decided that they would turn this into a residential rental on the second floor. So they did so, and we were in the habit of going to church and coming downtown and stopping at Ernie's or the smoke shop to get the Sunday paper and so forth. So one Sunday we came down, and this was, I think it was over Christmas or New Year's break, and we stopped there, and lo and behold, the water was coming out from under the doors, from the upstairs, and running all the way down Center Street to Water Street. So this not to be named, but this residential tenant that was on the second floor decided that she was going away for the holidays, and oh my goodness, while I'm away, I think that I'll leave the bathroom window up a little bit in the back so that we get some fresh air in here and air the place out while I'm gone. Little did they know that opening the bathroom window in January, when it gets down to 0, causes the water to freeze and burst the pipes, and next thing you know, it's running down Center Street. So that was the end of residential tenants for downtown. We learned the hard way. This is the trust block, which had the trust company in it, which was merged with First National Bank of Bath and then with the First National Bank of Portland, and it wasn't needed when the new bank was built. So it was acquired during that time, and it was in the early 1960s. This was before the days of the historic district in downtown, and this was, I guess, under the Morse regime, this was the biggest mistake in remodeling the front of a store. This store, if you look around in Bath, there aren't many that don't have wooden windows and old-fashioned windows, and this store got remodeled with new big windows and aluminum frames and an aluminum door, and it did not match the old building. So this was a no-no that we committed, but it was the only one, I think. Hopefully, it was, so. Okay, not many of you have seen this. This is the Sagadahock boiler room. This is what heated 9 buildings in the downtown. And in the older days, back in the 50s and 60s, we actually burned coal. And we had someone who came down and used to shovel coal into the boilers at certain times and was there early in the morning to make sure that they were fired up and stuff like that. And then we switched to oil, and then we switched. This picture here shows these are dual fuel boilers. They can run on natural gas or they can run on oil. You just have to switch a switch. And right now, you have to throw darts to decide which you want to burn because of the new costs. This is one of 4 boilers that Sagadahock had to run. We had a boiler down in the Grant building. We had what was called the Uptown boiler in the Grassy building, and then we had a boiler in the Moses building that we working. So when we were doing exclusively oil, we used to buy and contract for 80,000 gallons of oil a year. And we had to be very careful because 80,000 gallons, if the price goes up a penny, that's $800. So we had to be very careful about contracting and hope that we locked in at the right price at the right time. Sometimes we did, sometimes we didn't. So this is an example of parts of the business that sometimes aren't seen, and it's very critical to have certain people that run stuff for you to make it work. And we had a whole bunch of people. We had a there was a Mr. Oliver, I think he was almost 90 before he retired. This was back when I was a kid. And then Fred French came along, and there were other people, and then Roy Ordway, of course, a lot of you knew Roy. But they were making sure that this equipment worked and checking on it. And later, we've had more computer controls and stuff like that, and you have to have somebody that knows what they're doing. So this was also a complication that developed in selling the buildings. Because if you sold a building that didn't have a boiler in it, and they were getting heat from here, Sagadahock didn't own that, so how was we gonna get paid, be paid for running the boilers and providing the heat? So we had to create a heating association in order to sell the buildings, and some of the members of these buildings that we sold belong to the heating association. The heating association now operates this setup here. This is what used to be the Salvation Army building. It was a Beale Street barbecue for a while, and it's now recently opened as Kennebec Meat Company. I sold the building to Michael Quigg from Beale Street, and then he decided he didn't want to be in business anymore, and he sold it to these people. I think this is one of my father's favorite buildings because it was the Thomas W. Hyde block. This was the home of the office or the administration of Bath Iron Works when they were first 1889, when they were first organized, and this was their office, even though all the business was down on the other side of the railroad tracks. But my dad was fond of Thomas W. Hyde, so he sort of liked this building, and he's the one that had the name put on the block there. One of the things about modern building codes and whatever is that you have to have two means of egress. So this ugly little thing here between these two, between the Grant building and this building, is a second means of egress to the second floor of the Grant building and to the Hyde building. And that was built by Sagadahock to come up to snuff with the building codes. Okay, this is the east side of Front Street, and little research from Robin came up with the names of these buildings. And this was formerly the Pierce block. I called it the Shaw block. And if most of you can remember, this was where Shaw's bookstore used to be here. This used to be the Central Maine Power was in this, and then on the second, third floors, I think, was the Bath Daily Times and the Bath Independent weekly paper. And believe it or not, the Central Maine Power store there that wasn't just where you went in and paid your power bill. You could go in there and buy electric appliances. If you wanted a toaster or whatever, you went in there and bought your electric appliances. They were in that kind of business back in the day. And then here's Freeman's Barber Shop that moved over into the Lincoln block. And I think that the Bass Smoke Shop was in one of these, and I think the Colonial Restaurant was also here before you got to Mitchell Lane between the City Hall and whatever. But these were all torn down to make way for the new bank. And as you can see, this created a lot of change because the Shaw's bookstore moved up to the bank block where now your cooking is. They moved in there. Freeman's Barber Shop moved over to the Lincoln block. The Bass Smoke Shop moved down to Gill Street. I think the Times Record moved into another rental space. And I think at Central Maine Power left and went somewhere else. I don't know exactly where. But this was a big change when this happened. When the bank moved out of the first floor of the Lincoln Block, where the Cafe Creme is now, why there was a Barsness men's clothing store moved in there. You all remember that one? So this was the new bank that was built there to take the place of those buildings. So this is the Percy block, which is the next block north of where the Sagadahock block is today and whatever. So this was the David Percy and Sons. They were the first department store to move in there, and they were there before Center's, Roy Putney and Center's department store, and then there was a Barden's was in there, and then finally my father convinced Bob Rennie that he should be in there. This was the first store that the Rennies ever rented. They always owned their own stores, but he convinced him that he needed to be in Bath. And this is my pride and joy in selling the stores, to selling the buildings, to sell this building to the Rennies, because the Rennies is the big store in Bath. It's the central store in Bath, and I wanted them badly to stay here in Bath, and I made the price right so that they could afford to stay in Bath, and they have made a significant investment in that building with an elevator, new stairways, new bathrooms. They perked up the iron ceiling downstairs, and there were people that wanted them to bring back the little trolley cars that went around the store when Center's department store was, but that was a little bit too much. And this is what Rennie's looks like today. Now, this is the Union Block, and I still haven't figured out how this works. But evidently, at some point in time, there were 3 sections to the Union Block. Supposedly, this over here, at one point in time, was a part of the Union Block. This is like the Columbia Block and the Moses Block, in that to get to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors in here, you have to go in this doorway, go up the stairs, and then you come over into the Union Block, and then go up the stairways. And you do not want to do this. It's not good, because if you don't agree with what the owner of your stairway wants to do with it, it's kind of difficult. But anyways, supposedly we own the alleyway, but obviously it's a public way to the city parking lot down back. This alleyway was put in here so that the people in the Bath Iron Foundry, which was down behind here, had access to Front Street, and people on Front Street had access to the foundry, which was down beyond. One of the interesting things about this building was bought in 1890 by SREA, but you can see that the 4th floor was added on afterwards in 1929. So it's kind of an interesting building. This is also, in the wintertime, this space up here is one of the coldest spaces in all of Sagadahock spaces, because that is the end of the line for the steam pipe from the boiler room that comes away from Sagadahock. So this is a list of the buildings that Sagadahock owned when we started selling them in 2017. The first one was brackets in May of 2017. And this actually is, I think, is in sequential order, one thing that I got right. And so everything has sold, with the exception of down at the bottom of the office building in Woolwich is rented to Lincoln Enterprises, and they're going to be buying it as soon as they and the bank agree on what's going to happen. And the other part of the operation of Sagadahock Real Estate that is an important part was that we had people in the office who were running the office for us over the years, and this is during the Morse regime. I don't know what was going on during the Moses, but we had several people that were running the office, and they were a very important part of it because they communicated with our tenants, and they collected the rent and did the books and answered the phone and all of those things. And we had Virginia Rowe, who was the daughter of Mr. Oliver, who used to tend the boiler room furnaces and take care of the coal. And then we had Alice Munsey, and we had Sylvia Keene, we had Betsy Morse, we had Sherry Owen, and then at the end we had Penny Fontenez. And so we had very good people in the office, and because of them we were able to be successful. So I think that that's the end of my talk. So I hope you learned something or some little tidbit that you didn't know before. Thank you.